Hello, beautiful visionaries. I'm your host, Lorna, and today I'm really excited to bring to you Jesse Gould, a pioneer in psychedelic therapies. As founder and president of the Heroic Hearts Project, he has spearheaded the research and acceptance of ayahuasca therapy programs for military veterans. His mission is to help military veterans struggling with mental trauma and spread awareness of the benefits that ayahuasca therapies offer as an alternative treatment to pharmaceuticals. I'm really excited to talk to Jesse today about how we can save veterans' lives through plant medicines. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad to be on this platform and talk to, all the people who are tuning in. It's definitely an honor.
So I'm deeply honored to have you here, and I'd love to hear your story. How did you end up discovering the potential of ayahuasca to be able to heal war trauma that veterans experience as a result of their service?
Yeah, of course. And my journey started similar to many others in this psychedelic space through personal experience, personal self-discovery, and healing. And so mine started in this chapter anyway, with me being in the military. I was an Army Ranger, and had a few deployments to Afghanistan. When I got out of the military and was trying to adjust or go back into civilian life and find a job and live the air quotes normal life. And when I started doing that and started proceeding it, I was successful on some sides, on the superficial side, but what I found is I was really struggling internally. And there wasn't any sort of clear path of how to better my mental health. And so for a while I struggled. I just found myself in this situation where, again, on the superficial, I had a great job and social network and all this, but I was just unhappy, and I got more and more unhappy. I was struggling a lot with pretty severe anxiety, depression, all sorts of other issues. And I just, deep down inside me knew something was wrong, and I couldn't really figure out why. And so the more I started looking into it and asking for help from professionals, the more I realized how limited, one, the knowledge about mental health really was, at least in the places I looked, but two, how few the options are for helping individuals overcome it. And the more I try to look into it, the more I just became a little bit more hopeless. And I saw, professional help, and they essentially try to put me on medications, and just really wasn't a pathway that I wanted to go. But it was around the same time I heard about ayahuasca, and I heard about it on, a podcast or social media. When I first heard about it, I was very skeptical, and just kind of listening to it out of, just boredom. But I never dreamt that I would pursue that, because I had no history of psychedelics. I had no real intention. But like I said before, I was just coming to this point where I knew something needed to change, and I knew there's something just not right that I couldn't explain and that nobody around me could explain. And so for whatever reason, the thought of ayahuasca, the concept of me actually pursuing it, just grew in my mind more and more, to where it almost became something I had to do. And unfortunately, certain forces in my life lined up, and I just decided to take that leap of faith. So I left my job, which was easy because I knew I wasn't happy there. And I traveled to Peru, and went to a ayahuasca center that I had done some research about, but still going in very skeptically and nervous, since it was my first ever experience and didn't really know what to expect. And so, I went there. It was a week long center, week long retreat, where there was an option for 4 ayahuasca ceremonies in a very traditional setting. And for me, when I went through it, it was very difficult, but through the whole course of it, it drastically obviously changed my life in the immediate, but also opened up my eyes about this power of some of these plants and the potential for therapy. And so, I had my own process and was trying to figure out what just happened, was still just not very understanding, and going through the integration afterwards. But more and more after that, my experience, when I saw the continuation of some of the good experiences that I saw and then healthy benefits that I saw, the idea that this needs to be better understood and discussed within the veteran community again became more prominent. And for those that aren't familiar, the veteran community, especially in the US, is going through a mental health crisis, a vast suicide epidemic, where numbers, as high as 22, but in the average range, 15 to 17, veterans commit suicide on a daily basis. And myself and many other veterans I know a handful that have unfortunately taken their life. And so there's at this time when I saw this, super powerful option that wasn't being discussed. And so that really was the inspiration for Heroic Hearts Project, to bring this discussion, to bring a little bit more education, and eventually facilitate the passage of other veterans to ayahuasca and other psychedelic treatment options. And so since then, it really just took on a life of its own. And we've been successful in helping dozens and dozens of veterans, not only in getting them to safe ayahuasca retreats, but supporting them in the coaching and in the preparation, and then also just having this discussion with people who might not even be interested, but at least they want to know about it for themselves, for their families. And so just trying to do our part to spread the word, but do it in a responsible and safe way for those that are interested and wanting to eventually pursue it.
So I'd love to hear what the veteran experience is coming out of conflict and war. So people do their service, and wherever they end up getting deployed to, there are going to be a number of a wide range of experiences. Can you just share with us, what the veteran experience is like? I mean, I have only ever had an office job, so I can't even imagine the hardships that people go through, so that when they come back to society, it seems like a completely different world altogether from the time that you were in service and the time reintegrating back. So I'm curious to know, is there any support whatsoever? How does the military actually prepare you for life back in normal society with people that have no concept of what your experience is like?
Yeah, a great question. And one of the issues, it's like any other group, and the military in itself is especially big. There's a lot of jobs, there's a lot of experiences, and the individuals that are in it are also going through their own issues, whether it's personal drama, childhood drama, and then also combat trauma. And so it's hard to just paint a curtain over everybody, because they come out of it, have different experiences, different traumas. But a big part of it is what we've come to know in terms of PTSD and what we see in the movies, where an individual goes to combat, goes to a war zone, and comes back with a lot of issues because of what they saw, what they participated in, the stress of that sort of life, the existential threat of possibly losing your life, losing your friend's life. All that wears on you in a lot of different ways. But there's also this huge other issue that I don't think we necessarily understand very well, which is just sort of the general wear and tear, the heightened stress levels, the exposure of a lot of veterans, and that transition into civilian life, which can be starkly different. All these things are much harder to measure on any sort of psychological scale, and therefore are harder to track and harder to diagnose. And so, myself, and I've seen a lot of other veterans that maybe not have one specific thing where they can point to of that's going to mess me up down the line, but maybe have a bunch of smaller experiences, or maybe just sort of the stark contrast really affects them, slows them down. And so we have this very misunderstood, I think, aspect of mental health, where we try to designate something PTSD without really understanding what that all entails and the repercussions. In terms of the military, again, because they're dealing with so many different experiences and members, they really, I don't think, have developed a great transition program. I think it's changed after some guys I've talked to, just being more inclusive and including a little bit more diagnosis in terms of head trauma. But generally speaking, it is severely lacking, and you're seeing that from the end results of continued trauma, continued rates of PTSD, suicide, anxiety, all this kind of stuff. So, in my experience, it really wasn't great. It was kind of more of a check the box. You go through medical out processing. You have to go through some classes that teach you how to write a resume and show you where to buy a suit and all that kind of stuff. But there really is no, you were a soldier, you're transitioned into a civilian. And that can be very hard to understand for people that don't have that experience, but you can kind of understand it from some of the media where you've seen soldiers go through basic training, you see them go through these training programs, these selection programs, and all of those are meant to change how you think in a lot of ways, to work as a unit, to work as this military body, and to react in almost an automatic sort of programming. So if something happens, you don't waste time thinking about it. You know exactly how to do it, and you know how to do that in the context of a larger group. When you go to civilian world, it's a much different sort of thing. It's a much slower life. It tends to be much more individualistic in the US. A lot of professions don't have the same sort of sense of importance or sense of that you're doing something with effect. And so all these things, are very hard for a veteran. They get out, they oftentimes lose their community, their brotherhood, their sisterhood. They will go into a corporate job or some other job where they're just, typing away and maybe not having that importance. They might already have some of these issues, mental trauma, actual physical issues. And oftentimes they're kind of left alone. And as these issues get worse, it's almost like a spiraling effect where they'll get out of shape, they'll, abuse substances, they will sort of wreck parts of their lives. And so it can be a very hard issue to come around. And the only real solution that we're giving them is, generally speaking, a lot of medications. And so it's pretty common to see vets with 10 plus different medications, and they're still struggling to get by. And that's sort of the paradigm we're trying to change with this. And it is showing, if you see all the scientific research, that psychedelics do have a tremendous potential for being sort of the next revolution of mental health care.
So say that we have a veteran that is trying to reintegrate back into civilian life and really having a difficult time. What support does the military offer? Is there a hotline? What is the typical protocol or procedure to connect that veteran with some form of support, psychiatric care?
Yeah, so I mean, there is that, and like I said, it has been increasing. The veteran can go to the VA, the Department of Veteran Affairs, and they do have sort of a mental side of things. Unfortunately, the care with the VA can vary drastically from place to place. And some places can have too many people, some places have different options, but at the end of the day, most of them rely on this formula of talk therapy with the assistance of pharmaceuticals, which, not to demonize them, they can be very helpful, but that is almost the solution across the board, no matter what the veteran is struggling from. On the tail end, you really have to be, the veteran themselves have to be active if they want to sort of change the formula, change the landscape. The VA and some organizations have tried to promote certain ways of integrating in society. There are a lot of nonprofits, generally nonprofits and private industries, that have taken up the slack. But the VA has been trying to expand it. They do more information, they do more appeal, but it can be kind of it's not a clear-cut course. The veteran themselves has to really do the research. They have to reach out. They have to do all this kind of stuff. And so for a person that is already severely struggling and already having a very hard time coping, just even going through that process can be overwhelming. So just, again, my personal story, it's not the universal story, but I've heard it similar enough times where just me even going through and getting a medical evaluation, I had to go through 3 or 4 different offices. I had to call up all sorts of different hotlines. I had to do a Freedom of Information Act just to get my own medical records to get them analyzed by another doctor. All this took days, all this took a lot of time and a lot of patience on myself. And again, if you are already struggling and you're already on, all sorts of different pharmaceuticals and stuff like that and disabled, all of each one of those steps can be another thing to just, another barrier that's so hard to overcome.
Yeah, that sounds really traumatic to have to even go through that bureaucracy, completely daunting. I mean, just thinking about it for myself, it's not at all encouraging. So is the VA on board with some alternative treatments? I understand that there's some discussion around MDMA for the treatment of PTSD among veterans, and that the VA might be involved with that. I've also heard of some initiatives around the use of cannabis. Can you tell us like where the VA is with regards to embracing psychedelics, or at least even pot?
Yeah, I mean, so the hard part is, on one side, the VA is just giant bureaucracy. So no matter
Mhm.
what, it's going to be a very hard thing to move, and it moves at a very slow pace. The other side is their hands are tied. It's not just necessarily that the VA is this evil organization or this inept organization. On the side of a lot of these substances, it's a federal organization, and so their hands are tied by the drug classification. And so since cannabis and since psychedelics and MDMA are all Schedule 1 substances, they cannot actually prescribe it until that changes, or until there's some sort of federal mandate that allows them to do it. So until then, their hands are really tied. And that is even further tied by the availability of research and support, which again just gets all complicated with the drug scheduling and financial input and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, it's very tricky for them, and that's why you see that there hasn't really been movement in even cannabis, which is pretty widely considered to have some sort of medicinal value across the board. And so you see that in Canada, where veterans can actually get reimbursed for cannabis, but their system works differently. So in the U.S., I really haven't heard of any push forwards in terms of in cannabis. CBD is still even banned in pretty sure a lot of the military. I'm not specifically sure on everything. I think they've taken some steps forward in MDMA, but that's just because MDMA has gone through all these clinical trials. It's within a year or two of being federally able to prescribe because of the FDA trials. But again, they weren't the first movers on there. They weren't the ones that were funding this research. They were just, now, I guess to their credit, at the end of this, are open and having conversations. So those conversations are happening, but it's still a big question of how it will look. And again, one of the issues is it can depend on spot to spot. It can depend on how well they allow for MDMA therapy, how they're going to have people trained. So those are also question marks, like whether it'll be efficient or not. And you can already see some writing on the wall around that about how they've sort of pursued ketamine therapy. So ketamine can be very effective for certain cases of PTSD and suicidal ideation, and it has a different scheduling than MDMA. So you can actually use it in clinics, which is why there's clinics all over the US right now. And so, they have been using it increasingly for mental health and for these treatments. And the VA actually a year or two ago indicated that they were going to increase the push to use ketamine. And since that push, their numbers have been embarrassingly low. It's might have increased, but the last time I checked a few months back, they'd only, putting out that mandate, worked with 12 vets, and the testimonies from the vets were, unimpressive in terms of how they handled it and all that kind of stuff. So again, there's just a lot of issues and a lot of change in mentality around these, because in some ways it does work similar with the current mental health protocols, but in a lot of ways, especially if you're using sort of the mind altering states of these substances, it's going to take sort of a relearning and sort of a transition from how we normally do it.
Okay, so based on what you just shared, it seems like seeking support from the VA is probably going to be painfully bureaucratic and not really the fastest way to get to the psychedelic assisted therapy if you were a veteran. So what are the options for veterans who have heard about the potential for psychedelics, especially psychedelics like ayahuasca or psilocybin? Folks that might want a more nature-based approach, what should they do?
I mean, that's the tricky spot, and that's sort of the sad story, is that there are limited options. Veterans even seeking ketamine oftentimes have to pay out of pocket for private ketamine clinics just because to get reimbursed, like I said, is extremely tricky and just really not streamlined through the VA. And we're not even near the use of psilocybin or DMT or ayahuasca in the U.S. Psilocybin is going through FDA trials, but it's still going to be years before it goes through those and then also is accepted, and we'll have to figure out what the protocols are. There's certain local options. So you have something like Oregon, which will really be sort of the lighthouse of how a lot of this is going to play out. And so for veterans that might be able to access it up there, depending on the legality, and it will be legal, but in terms of like how the protocols work out. But veterans will still have to be cautious, because if they have security clearance or they have certain jobs, who knows if the job might restrict it, even though it's available there. So there's all sorts of different barriers and headwinds that we have to get around. At least it's moving in the right direction. But at the core, that is the reason why Heroic Hearts exists, is to find ways to connect veterans, find ways to research these substances when it's pretty much been prevented by the government in the US and other countries for a number of decades. So that's where Heroic Hearts is trying to fill in the gap for those veterans that are seeking to pursue this, and it's not going to affect their lives. And we work, we do a check, we work with other institutions that make sure it's safe, it's the right course for them, the minimize damage, minimize danger for those pursuing it. We connect veterans to places where they can legally pursue these in a very safe manner. So we only work with retreat centers that we've vetted, that have great safety records, in countries where generally substances are allowed, have exemptions, all that kind of stuff, and have been used for decades. So that's what we're trying to fill in the gap, because in the US, especially for these organic hallucinogenics, it's going to take years. Places like Canada might beat us to the punch. It seems like they will, and get humane use or even more a little bit quicker in terms of certain ways of using it domestically. But it's again, there's going to be a lot of veterans that unfortunately have to continue to suffer, or are at risk of suicide until that happens. And so on my side, on my team side, we're going to do everything we can to help the veterans right now, and not wait for this bureaucratic system to enroll.
So where are you going? Are you principally working with ayahuasca retreat centers, or are you also connecting to psilocybin retreat centers that might be located in Jamaica, for example? What options are you presenting for veterans that come to Heroic Hearts?
Yeah, so we've pursued a little bit of everything. So some centers in Jamaica, we have a UK counterpart that will, once COVID travel restrictions open up, are going to be really looking towards the Netherlands, where they can do sort of truffle-based therapy. And then some domestic options, like I said, like Oregon, where they'll actually be able to pursue psilocybin-assisted therapy. And then also different ketamine clinics, if that is a viable option. But yeah, a big part of what we've done is ayahuasca based. And so some of the main countries are Peru, Colombia, Costa Rica. Most of these countries come from the tradition where ayahuasca and these practices came from, the Amazonian tradition. And so they keep on with these traditions, and they've been doing it for quite a while. So, it's their traditions. They are the subject matter experts, and just from the way they've done it. I've seen other adaptations, but I've never seen anything as powerful as sort of the indigenous tradition of these of working with these substances, and the respect and the culture. And I think that brings a lot to it as well, for the veterans going to a different culture and bonding with the local people, and just sort of this cultural transformation, this exchange of ideas and values. And it can be a very beautiful thing. But yeah, for veterans, psilocybin can be very effective, but we just found, especially for specific personality types and specific types of trauma, we've just found ayahuasca to be above and beyond effective for having a transformational effect on the individual's life.
So what about ayahuasca compared to ketamine?
It's still too early to say, to do sort of like direct comparisons, or I know there's a lot of people that are trying to diagnose in terms of like this issue, this disorder with this substance and this sort of protocol. I think it's still too early. We're still trying to discover all of them and still see how they sort of work, and if there's any sort of combination. And then you also have the complexity of ceremonies and how it's all done in traditions. And so we're just trying to be open and seeing what we see with different ones. And at the end of the day, I think a lot will depend on the individual. Everybody interacts with different substances differently. We all have different genetics on some level. But something like ketamine, one of the advantages that we can say now is that you can work with ketamine when you're still on other medications. So certain medications like SSRIs are actually dangerous to use in conjunction with ayahuasca. And so somebody that's been on those medications for a while and doesn't have a viable, safe means of getting off of them, ayahuasca is probably not the best next step. Somebody who is, has very severe conditions or very severe suicidal ideations or other diseases or illnesses, a powerful hallucinogenic might, again, not be the best thing for them. Whereas ketamine, you can do it in a little bit more controlled setting. You can use more on a specific dosage. And for a lot of those people, for a big percentage, ketamine can offer antidepressive effects and anti-suicide ideation effects in almost an immediate side of it. The downside is that those individuals might have to continue to do treatments with that, which with the current protocols, it can be a little bit expensive. But again, it can be very effective for those that are falling in that right range. And our job right now is just to, be cautious, be safe, and figure out what we can learn about it and see if there is, if we can figure out a little bit more the best practices, best protocols for working with, different individuals.
So I'd love to hear what ayahuasca did for you. So in the beginning of our conversation here, you were just sharing some of the transformational effects that you received. What was it for you that made you feel that there's something that is powerful and unique about this plant medicine that can specifically help veterans?
Yeah, of course. And I think the beauty of something like a hallucinogenic like ayahuasca or even psilocybin is that it doesn't work in just one direct manner. It works in coordination with the individual. And so everybody has a very unique experience. Each time they go in, it can also be a unique experience. And because it's working in coordination with your own brain, it often shows you what you need to, or it shows you it in a way that you understand. My interpretation of things will be vastly different from yours. And so the way I process trauma, or the way I can potentially overcome that same trauma, are going to be two different methodologies and two different ways of pursuing it possibly as well. But for me, the thing at first was that it was tough. There was nothing that you could confuse as, sort of a recreational or an overly like enjoyable experience. There can be a lot of enjoyment and some great experiences, but there's nothing that makes you feel like, oh, this is like a recreational, I'll just take this at a concert or what have you. So for me, coming from my background was very helpful, and for a lot of veterans too, because they don't want to go on something else that they're going to become dependent on, or that they have to worry about some sort of addiction or some sort of falling into a hole into. So, I mean, that's a very relieving kind of dynamic of it. The other part is that I've seen bond very well is it can be very challenging. And veterans are often used to being confronted with very challenging events. A lot of the training selection process, they're put to the test on a both physical and mental basis. And so, and they understand that they've been holding down this trauma, compartmentalizing this trauma for a long time. So the fact that it is challenging, that it can take some determination, some courage to get past, it really makes sense because of how severe that trauma is. So, you know, for me coming from it, if it was just this very easy sort of experience and I was just happy the whole time and didn't have to really come to terms with some truths and some other issues, I don't think I would have gotten as much out of it. It kind of made sense in that paradigm for me. But I mean, like really what we're seeing, veteran or not, is that it seems to work on two levels at least. Where one, there is that psychological, almost enhanced talk therapy side or prolonged exposure therapy, where you're faced one-on-one with certain traumas, certain things you're holding back or facing new truths. And so almost in that talk therapy sense, you're going through the story, you're looking around it, you're seeing what caused you, what your hangups are, what your negative thought patterns are. On the other side, the physical side, which it doesn't seem like a lot of other treatment protocols really even consider, is that a lot of veterans have micro trauma in the brain, or they might have inflammation or heightened like cortisol levels in their brain, which all affect brain chemistry and can affect hormone production. And so our kind of hypothesis right now, and there is some early evidence behind it, is that certain organic and possibly the synthetic versions of these substances can either, whether or not it's rebalance them or sort of reset some of these levels, or just, you know, put them to the mean. What we're seeing is on that physical side that it seems to have a restorative or healing effect on the brain in a few different ways. And so the combination of that, where you're not only getting that sort of enhanced therapy section, but you're also getting, you know, a restorative aspect for your brain. It's sort of like the full body and, you know, other parts of your body as well, the full body sort of healing process that you're going through. Whereas other, you know, modalities tend to just focus on like, okay, this is just for the brain, this is just for the body, this is just for this. These not miraculously, but these seem to impressively work on so many different levels that, you know, that's why I personally believe that they're so effective.
Okay, do entities have any role in this? Right. So a lot of people would attribute their profound healing experience of ayahuasca to also be associated with seeing entities in their visions, or having encounters with ancestors, or even psychic surgery from aliens. I'm curious to know whether when you, or when the veterans that come through Heroic Hearts experience ayahuasca, do they ever talk about these paranormal experiences, and whether or not those experiences also impact their healing?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a part of it, and it's definitely a part of a lot of psychedelic experiences, and especially ayahuasca. Does seem to be a much more enhanced spiritual side, and possibly almost like an extraterrestrial side, a lot of sort of weird, undescribable sides. And again, you know, I think it's on the individual. We all interpret, you know, as much as we have similar experiences, we all interpret the world in different ways, and we also need different things to bring on our interpretations. And so you see that in everyday life. Some people are more religious, some people are very agnostic, some people need to have like the science and the nitty-gritty. Some people just need to have kind of a more like gut or emotional sort of feeling. There's not one way or one right dynamic or one way to understand the world or navigate through the world. And if I try to push my philosophy on you, where you understand it on the scientific side, and I'm trying to push something else, it's not going to make sense to you, and we're just going to, have some sort of collision of our different viewpoints. So, I think, again, like I said, the beauty of this is it works with the person of how they view things, how they interpret things. And it's impossible for any of us to say, this is right, this is wrong. I think that's getting too black and white. But again, and on the other side, I think there can be sort of a rabbit hole in people focusing too much on that and going too far down that rabbit hole, as opposed to just allowing of like, okay, if that's what I see, and maybe that's even what I believe. But if you try to like force that or argue that, or I
Mm.
think even spend far too much time, figuring out what exactly that was, I think those are all traps. And whereas a lot of this training, I kind of think, is more coming more centered in yourself, understanding your intuition, and then just allowing. If I, whether or not I understand the specific mechanisms or if there are entities, that doesn't do me any good on a day-to-day basis. What does me good is being centered and understanding myself, and then just allowing. My whole process through this, dependent on my beliefs, has just been, allow what's going on. I've seen some crazy stuff, and I've seen some stuff that maybe has a more rational explanation, maybe doesn't. But it doesn't do me any good to like really dive deep into like, what is that? Let me, find every single pixel. Let me find every single code of that. I think it's just a trap of our ego to try to control different things. And a lot of the psychedelic process is us understanding. And I think this whole COVID pandemic is really an emphasis on that, is that we have control over certain things, but there's a lot of things outside of our control. And the more we try to, harness it and mold it to our liking, the more we're just expending a lot of useless energy that we can be using to, be happier, enhance what we have, enhance our family circle.
Mhm. Very well said. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts about that. So with veterans that come to Heroic Hearts, what do you see as the transformational process that the folks go through? I mean, is it a one ceremony transformation, or do you really find yourself supporting veterans through multiple ceremonies and through an ongoing process over many months to really see some foundational shift in their sense of well-being and balance and wholeness in themselves?
Yeah, so I mean, no matter what, mental health is a continuous practice, and that's one of the things that we try to train, we try to teach, is that this isn't a magic pill. This isn't something that's, one day to the next you're different people. There takes a lot of work, and there takes a lot of continued effort, and that's going to last through the rest of your life. And it's not always going to be as hard. You're not going to hit the same hurdles, but you'll hit different hurdles, and you constantly have to do that. It's the same as, going to the gym. It's not just you go to the gym for the week and then you're fit for the rest of your life. You have to continue to do maintenance, continue to listen to yourself, and go. So I mean, in terms of the actual like psychedelic side of it, the psychedelic treatment, we prefer that veterans, and I think in general, go through a week of continual ceremonies. 3 to 4 is generally pretty good if they're powerful enough ceremonies and the center knows what they're doing, because that really allows them to kind of get the full story arc of getting through their trauma, at least on the initial basis. Where first ceremony, you might be getting your sea legs, kind of figuring out what it is, and the first and second, really getting a lot of stuff out, whether it's purging or whether going, deep dive into that. And then the last ceremonies tend to bring it all together, of where the first ones might be very hard. The last ones tend to be like, oh, I understand why that was hard, and I understand what I need to do right now. And so having that sort of force, that the combined ceremonies, we've seen some very powerful stuff come out of that. But going into that, we have a whole preparation phase where it's like, okay, you're doing this, the pre-integration of like, let's get your mind right. What are you looking for? Let's already start the introspection. Let's already start, getting stress out of your life, the whole diet before going over there. And then that continues afterwards of like, okay, well, you had these great insights, hopefully. You've seen some negative patterns. Hopefully there was, multiple layers of healing, as we mentioned before, but you still have to integrate it. You still have to figure out ways to hold yourself accountable, to hold on to those messages, all that, and give yourself a good path forward. Especially when you're breaking some of these negative patterns, you can easily go right back into it if you're going to do the same sort of thing. And then obviously, if you do the same thing, you're going to end up with the same sort of issues. But what psychedelics tend to do is it almost flattens that course to where you can now make new paths. You can now make positive paths, but you still have to take that action. You still have to go there. And so that's also what Heroic Hearts tries to do, is support that, encourage that, give some sort of guidance there of how they can do it. In terms of follow-up, it really depends on the individual. But at the very least, we say we want people to integrate it for 6 months to a year, because you can still get new lessons and new things that you're learning about yourself, even a year, even multiple years later. And you don't want to, if you're just going all the time, I don't think you're necessarily using it to its full advantage. And I don't think you're integrating everything that you need to necessarily, because you're just constantly at that high level without bringing it into real life. And so, if somebody does want to go back, we will work with them, talk with them about going back, and make sure that they are going there with good intentions, that they're not just reworking the same thing over and over again, that they're, trying to break new ground. And, that's sort of the case. Some people have childhood stemming from trauma, or lots of layers of trauma. So sometimes they might need to continue to do work down the line. Some people, no matter what, life is very tough. Life can bring new burdens to us, and sometimes we can lose the path, and it can be a little bit muddied. And so, maybe a smaller something, like maybe some people have found a lot of benefit in just doing sort of a re-up after a while of a smaller psilocybin dose or something like that, just to kind of reconnect them, recenter them. And so again, all of this is very uncharted territory. So we're just trying to be open, but we're also trying to be safe. The last thing we want, even though psychedelics aren't addictive, you can be dependent on any sort of thing. And so if you're using any substance to ease your way, to distract you, to not do the work yourself, then you're becoming dependent on it. And so we're trying to develop protocols that empowers people and use the psychedelic to their most advantage, to make sure that person is more powerful without having the person rely too much on the psychedelic for easy answers, for the clarity of what the steps are forward.
Got it. So help me understand if I'm grasping what range of support that you can offer veterans. So with Heroic Hearts, then can people come to you for specific experiences, or is it like, do you have an ongoing membership program where veterans can come, connect with your organization, continue to get coaching or, therapeutic support, and in preparation for that big trip when travel opens up? How exactly do you guys work?
Yeah, so it's more of a community method. And so veterans will come to us, they'll fill out an application, and these are veterans that tend to not have, just because there's so much of a demand, tend to not have previous experiences or nothing super profound. And so they come to us, and when we have the means, we're a nonprofit. So when we're organizing a retreat, we'll reach out to our wait list and say, hey, we're planning this. These are the details. Please let us know if this is something you're interested in. So then the veterans will apply to that. And of those that apply to this specific retreat, then we'll do sort of a vetting of the applications, checking for safety concerns, like I said, medication, health issues, checking what they wrote in response to their questions of, one, a good mix. We want there to be good group cohesion, but two, we want to make sure that it's right for that person. If the person, again, is just looking to go over there and as a distraction or what have you, or you can get a lot from their answers and talking to them. So we vet through that, we find the group, and then that's when we do sort of our protocol support financial grants for those that are in need, that need help financially, assistance to pay for the retreat or some of the coaching. And then we provide all that coaching, preparation, get them to go to these big retreats, the ayahuasca, or on the lesser side, the psilocybin. And then we'll do, so much of support afterwards. If those veterans that went through our program are looking for additional support, then the coaches that work with us can work with them on sort of a price scale, just so that they can get compensated too down the line after they've gone through. But then after that, those veterans are part of our community, and so we offer periodic Zoom calls where all the veteran alums can come and talk about it. They can reach out to us, and they're there for advice, or reach out to the coaches down the line if they want to re-up their coaching services. And so after that, as I said, the demand is so high, we can't just keep getting the same veteran more and more scholarships, but a lot of them tend to either not need it at all or pursue down the line more work because they understand the power of it and are just looking for more advice or more guidance, or seeing if there's other veterans that they want to go with. And so that's sort of what's bringing them into the community, and as much as we can, sort of the shared knowledge of how they can continue to do the work. And then hopefully down the line, as it evolves, really form these communities based on the local level. So where more people have gone through our program and maybe meet up in LA or meet up in Hawaii, to where they can talk to each other, go on hikes, they can do all this kind of stuff. And so that's sort of the long-term goal of rebuilding these communities that have been lost because of mental health and because of people's geographic separation.
And how big are the groups that you organize?
Generally, we try to restrict it to 10 to 15. 15 would be on sort of the big size. And that's really to get, and again, it'll depend down the line on what the substance is used. But like, let's say with ayahuasca, because it is so powerful, you want to keep a very intimate group size. It seems to be more effective, and you want to keep that sort of group dynamic, which, if you have more than 20, then smaller groups start forming, but around 10 to 15 is a good size for that. But then also you're dealing with, a very intense trauma. You're dealing with, very physically capable male and females. And so just in terms of making sure everybody's comfortable and making sure there's enough attention to everybody, that tends to be sort of a good, safe, and very effective group size. And we'd like to continue doing that. In the future, as these options expand and there's more clinical use of psilocybin, or ceremonies, or people can maybe have more of a microdosing protocol that gets them prepared, and hopefully it becomes a little bit more of a model that you can expand. But right now, like I said, as we're sort of learning about all this, we really want to make sure that we're focused on quality and getting the right people and helping them out as much as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time here. We're at the end of our session, and I really just want to, thank you from the bottom of my heart for this work that you're doing. It's so deeply needed, and I really commend your efforts. And I wish you so much success in growing your organization and reaching more veterans. I would love to ask you, Jesse, how can the audience best stay in touch with you?
Well, I appreciate it again, and thank you so much for the platform, and thank you so much for taking the time and with all these great questions. Our website is heroicheartsproject.org. There's ways to contact us. If you're a veteran, you can sign up for the application. We have an ambassador program for people who want to volunteer with our organization. You can also find that on the website. And then just social medias across the board, Facebook, Instagram, a little bit on Twitter. So any of those places you can find us, you can reach out to us. And as I said before, we are a nonprofit, and so we do run off the generosity of individuals that can support us. So, please donate, even if it's a small amount. If you have a little bit more financial means, you can sponsor a veteran or sponsor whole retreats. So please let us know and help us, continue to move this mission forward.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'll put the links down below to your social media and your website. And yeah, thanks again for your time. I want to wish you a beautiful rest of your day. And I look forward to connecting with you in person sometime.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much.
Bye.